That story in the Acts of the Apostles, the sort of stating of the Pentecost, I've always loved it, in part because I love languages. I am intrigued by them. Sometimes when you go on a retreat or if you're part of like an icebreaker activity, they'll say, if you could have one superpower, what would it be? Most people, psychologists know this, most people say flying, and fine. I always say the same thing. The power I would want would be to be fluent in all languages. I just think that your ability to connect with others is such an amazing thing. And when I am in other countries, I hate that limitation of not being able to be fully understood or to fully understand somebody. And so, because that's what happens in this story, right? I forget the guy's name that had made this point. There are two miracles in this story. And the first is the miracle of the tongue, that they spoke in other languages. That's cool in and of itself, but it isn't cool if you don't understand it, right? That's the second miracle, which was the miracle of the ears, that these people all understood them, in spite of the fact we have that long list of where they're from. So you have two miracles, and we have to think about that in our own Pentecost experience. What does that look like? How do you and I speak in ways that others will understand? How do we bring people together in the disparateness that is humanity, which is Americans, which is Christianity, which is the church, all the different ways in which we're different and separated, and maybe even more than that. Maybe it's become vitriolic. But what are the Pentecost moments? As I said at the start, this isn't just about, remember back 2,000 years ago when that thing happened? It's more about us today and what the Holy Spirit's going to ask of us today. But to put those two miracles together, then, it's going to come down to how, through the Holy Spirit, we speak in a way that others understand. And by and large, that's only going to come to us through experience. I know growing up in a town that had a significant Mexican community, I was just back there a couple weeks ago to visit, and I've been reminded, I should say, that when I say that, Adrian, Michigan is a large Mexican community, that many in my parish also are from Puerto Rico, and of course, quickly want to remind me that there's Puerto Ricans here too, right, because they're entirely different people. Well, that's its own point right in of itself. How do we understand people? But I've always thought that I was pretty thoughtful around people for whom English is a second language, because I was raised in a community for whom that was the case. But I didn't really actually understand it until I left what was comfortable to me, which is my country, and was studying in Bolivia. And then realized that there are many things we all do around language that are not helpful. When we're in front of someone who doesn't speak our language, what do we often do? Speak louder, which isn't inherently more helpful. They're not generally hard of hearing. And maybe we speak slower, or maybe we don't, but it's funny that our first instinct is to speak louder. But the one thing I noticed when all of a sudden I'm just trying to keep my head afloat in just Spanish full time was how often this is the case, and it's more true in English, that people speak very slurred together, right? And so that, again, it wouldn't matter the volume at which you said the following sentence, they're not going to get it, right? Do you want to eat? Joanna ate. Me too, but we'll do it later. And the poor second language speakers going, Joanna, right? They're rolling through their dictionary in their head, Joanna. And then they know you're looking at them, they're like, I think it's an easy question, but I missed it. I don't know, what did you say? And so learning to separate words is how you get understood, but that starts by understanding, right? St. Francis of Assisi, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so that when we're in front of someone who's different, is our first instinct to think about what it's going to take for them to understand you. And that's our first instinct. Well, what do they bring to this? So you could say, do you want to eat, right? And that's so weird for us. We just don't speak that slowly. But that allows them to hear each word one at a time, build it in their head and go, yes. That's the difference, though. And that simple truth applies to everything that we do. If you have a friend, a neighbor, a brother, a sister, a sibling that has some belief structure that is inconsistent with your own, that's the starting point. And don't take my word for it. It's how Jesus lived. You can't call yourself a Christian and avoid this. Almost every miracle he does, he meets people where they are. He never makes them come to him. In Mark 7 is a fine example. As you may know, St. Francis de Sales is patron of the deaf. One of the oblates of St. Francis de Sales is deaf. Several of us are fluent in American Sign Language as a result of our work in that ministry. But in Mark 7 is where he heals the deaf man. And the first thing he does is take him away from the crowd. And there's a deep cultural truth in doing that for him. And that's because many deaf people, regardless of how many people in a room can sign, can feel hugely isolated in a big room because they can't do what most of us do, which is kind of listen around. You know, like if we're in the hall and we're having a party and you hear someone talk about the Steelers, you catch this word, the Steelers. Oh, hey, yeah, my sister. Like, they can't do that. They don't possess. And so they have to kind of lock in. And so Jesus' ability to go, let me take you to your comfort space. Let me get you away from a space that makes you feel isolated. And let me just put this between you and I. Sometimes people say he did that so as not to embarrass him in the crowd. Sure, that's possible too. But if you spend any time in the deaf community, you would go, oh, before it's that, it's saying, I want to meet you on your terms, on your space. And so that these that spoke in Acts, right, through the Holy Spirit, they speak. And it's a beautiful, powerful miracle. But it would mean nothing if nobody understood it. You just go, I think they're speaking French. I don't know. It sounds nice. I was listening to On Being this morning. I had the bright and early 7 a.m. Mass at the monastery. It's off and on as I'm coming home. And the professor, I wrote her name down, but I don't remember it. She teaches at Wright State, actually. She does this whole thing on loss. But the two words she said that just pounded me about this homily is she was saying that when someone has lost something, a loved one, doesn't matter, they've lost their hearing, they've lost a loved one, they've lost their job. She had two words that she said was important in being a friend or a confidant to them, and it was to listen generously. Wow, to listen generously. And how often we don't do that. We're just too busy, right, to just be present to someone. And I thought, what a Pentecostal concept, to listen generously to each other, to not assume that I know how you feel about something. I experience this on many levels, and I'm sure you do too. There are things that you're involved in that people already know, right? Oh, you're part of that? I know all about it. And you want to go, that's funny, I've never seen you there. Oh, you're in the Rotary? I know all about the Rotary. Really? Are you a Rotarian? No, but I know all about it. Oh, wonderful, right? As a priest, people often, oh, I know all about that, and they come to all kinds of wild conclusions. Running a Catholic school, all kinds of conclusions. Being an American, all kinds of, just insert the things that are a part of our life. And is there anything more frustrating to see in someone's eyes that they think they know you? They have not listened generously to you. And then we're back to Jesus Christ. And we're back to the Holy Spirit that he poured out on these people at first. And the very Spirit he breathed on them, which takes on whole new meaning now in the midst of a pandemic, right? He breathed on them. Here, take this with you. So let's think about the power of what God has always done in time. But then to say, what's he asking of us today? Maybe we will or won't speak in a language that others understand. That's on some level just a miracle for God to work. But if we start by saying, I want to be hardwired to understand people first, well, that's something then that God can powerfully play the instrument that is us. He can do it. He has done it, and he will do it again. But that's our homework, if you want. That's our practice. And he'll strengthen us in this Eucharist to be people who listen generously. Because in the person of Christ, God listened generously. In the Holy Spirit that inspires us today, God listens generously, and he asks us to do the same. And so as we think of the power and the fire of God expressed in the Holy Spirit, what he needs from us and what our world needs from us is to be the kind of people that seek first to understand and then to be understood. May God be praised.